Welcome to the Table Podcast series with Bridget Johnson. Each month, we give you game-changing conversations about K-12 education and leadership. Join us as top educators, field experts, and administrators share actionable strategies to transform your school community. Let's dive in.
Welcome to The Table, the podcast where student-life professionals, educators, and change makers come together to share stories, insights, and ideas for building communities where everyone belongs. I'm your host, Bridget Johnson. Today, I'm excited to welcome Suzanne Carpenter, the founder and principal of Carpenter Leadership Consulting. She's a Gallup certified strength coach and former assistant head of school who now helps leadership teams unlock their full potential through strategic thinking and high performance team development. Today, we're talking about creating trust and strategic thinking in leadership teams. Welcome to the show, Suzanne. Happy New Year. How are you?
Hi, Bridget. Happy New Year. I'm doing well and I'm really excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, Suzanne, we're just going to jump right in.
Sure.
You made a significant transition from being assistant head of school to founding your own leadership consulting firm. What prompted the shift, and what did you experience as a school leader that taught you about what leaders really need?
Yeah, it's such a great question. It's a question I actually get a lot when I am talking to folks around sort of what prompted this decision and sort of where am I now. So leaving school leadership to start my own firm was actually not a decision I took lightly. And it's really because for a long time, I actually thought I wanted to be a head of school. I'd been in school for basically most of my career with a couple of small side stints. And I'd been hearing from mentors and colleagues for a long time, like, you're going to be a great head of school. Oh, Suzanne, you should be a head of school. And it was certainly the path I was on. I was most recently assistant head of school at Walnut Hill School for the Arts up here in the Boston area. And I was really spending time exploring headship, and what that next step would look like. And I also was fortunate to work with a really amazing head of school who gave me lots of opportunities to explore that for myself. But as I started to dig into that work, I also was starting to try to figure out sort of what that next step of that journey looked like. And while I loved being an assistant head and I loved working in schools, I just kept seeing and myself gravitating towards the adults in our community and thinking about their growth and leadership. And really coming through COVID, still working in schools, I kept seeing this pattern, right? Talented, committed leaders who were exhausted, who were trying to leave without the support, clarity, or strategic focus that they needed. And I realized that the part of the job that I really loved in the work that I was doing was developing leaders. So I was less focused on sort of that head of school role by that end point. And I was thinking about how do we help the adult learners in our community think more clearly, work more cohesively, lead with more confidence. And then at some point, it sort of became this moment where I realized that becoming a head of school was this dream that other people had for me that I no longer had for myself. And that it was sort of undeniable on what the next step was going to be.
Awesome.
And I think for me, myself, like my work as a school leader taught me that leaders need time and space to think. They need a partner to help them gain clarity. And they need a team around them that really works well together. And because when those pieces are in place, everything in our work becomes easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So you say you're on a mission to help leaders unlock their full potential. In your work with leadership teams across education and other sectors, what do you see as the biggest thing holding leaders back from that potential?
Oh, it's such a good question. And, I feel like leaders try to do a lot alone.
Yes.
I think right? I
Yes.
definitely was in that. I don't know about you.
Absolutely.
Did you find that was the case when you were in leadership?
Like you have to do the thing because I'm the leader,
Right.
right?
Absolutely. Or you feel like delegating it to someone else when they already have a full plate is too much, or your own plate becomes too full, but you're not really sure where else it goes. And then I feel like leaders end up carrying this burden of decision making, of culture, of setting the vision, of creating an operations structure that with if they worry about pulling themselves back, will it all fall apart? And
Right.
so I see that so often with leaders. And sometimes I think that one of the biggest blockers I see is just noise, right? This noise that's existing in all organizations, not just schools, but we see it a lot in schools around urgency, or we get people pleasing, or are these unclear expectations? Are we disappointing people when we make decisions that are really hard and are correct, right? Move things forward, but might be disappointing for some people. And I think that when we start to kind of clarify and quiet the noise for leaders, the things like purpose and priorities and focus really start to unlock what the potential really is. And so for me, that's where I think about the holding back, right? Like, how do we create space to have a moment of quiet,
Yes.
or moment of pause, to be able to really just kind of then see things forward? Because otherwise, I don't know, we all just are like going, and that doesn't help anyone in the end.
It does not help anyone. So, let's start with trust, since it's a foundation to everything else. And I think that's one of the things that you mentioned. In your experience, what does that look like on a high performing team? I always, think about the importance of relationship building and psychological safety, but it really just starts with, building trust. And so, I guess two questions. What does it look like on a high performing team? But more importantly, what does it look like? What does the absence of trust look like?
Yeah. I mean, I'm guessing like me, you've probably sat on teams where you've had trust and you've not had trust. And
Absolutely.
sometimes it's a feeling. I sometimes work with teams who can feel it and sometimes struggle to name what it is. When I see a team that has high trust, right? When they're high performing, when trust is truly the foundation, those are teams where the team members name real issues, they disagree openly, they follow through on their commitments, they assume that the rest of the team is also working towards the same goals with like a positive mindset around it. And you named it, right? There's psychological safety, which you can't really define in really a tangible, like, I'm openly disagreeing way, but people know that they feel like they can be their whole selves when
Right.
they come into that space. And to me, I love when I walk into a room, when I work with teams and they are pushing back on one another in healthy disagreement. They're not, I love the idea of you challenge the ideas and not the person.
Right.
Right. So
love
that's where
that.
you're
Yep.
starting. Yeah. You're seeing that on a team, and they feel like they're part of something more than just themselves. So that idea that they're working with other people to move things forward. The absence of trust, people know it, they can feel it, right? I think you have the meeting after the meeting is the one that I always think is like a telltale sign. A team without a ton of trust also is constantly revisiting decisions that were made. I find that they're questioning either others' motives. They tend to be quieter meetings, or you have a couple dominant voices and a couple of people who just never speak. I also find that low trust teams are where the leader is sometimes the bottleneck, or they themselves are doing all of the work. I mean, those are teams where like you walk into the room and you can kind of cut the tension with a knife.
Yes.
And the challenge with a team, especially when it's higher up in an organization, is teams with low trust or don't have it, that flows into the rest of the organization.
Yeah,
It
absolutely.
really, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
I hear folks talk about, culture's built from the ground up, but the reality is that culture is not built from the ground up. It comes from the top down.
Top down.
And
Yep.
when leaders don't focus on that, or they think that they don't have that kind of impact on the organization as a team, it's usually one of the first conversations I'm having with a group of like, okay, let's have a conversation here, folks, on what's actually going on.
Yeah, and so let's talk about that a little bit because, you're coming in, and I think sometimes leaders think there's one problem when it really is just
Mhm.
kind of the foundational, and they need to spend some time building relationships and building trust. And so when you walk in and say, maybe we should kind of work on the trust thing, is that often met with resistance? Or are people like, no, you're probably right, or we don't have time to do that? Like, what's the general reaction to that? Or is that how you phrase it?
It's not usually how I phrase it.
Fair enough.
Uh, so when I'm working with teams in a coaching capacity, I am usually doing some kind of diagnosis conversation beforehand to just get a sense of actually what's happening from
Okay.
the perspective of the individuals. And so people don't talk about trust in one particular way.
Right.
When I do some workshops, not necessarily in this type of scenario, but in others, I will oftentimes will tell people, like, I want you to sit down and write out the definition of trust. And what's really interesting about doing that exercise is that no one actually comes up with the exact same definition of
Right.
trust. What you might define as trust, Bridget, might be different than how I might define
Sure.
trust. And that's actually a really important thing to recognize, which is because if we don't talk about what that looks like and what that foundation of trust is for a team, we're making assumptions about the fact that other people might see it the same way that I do. And
Right.
I may not see trust the same way you do.
Exactly.
So that's where it's hard to talk. Trust is such a loaded word.
No, I know.
It's kind of one of the reasons I really love it, though, is that what we're talking about is sort of authenticity and consistency and empathy, and really thinking about the way those show up for folks, and not just about kind of this me coming in and being like, we need to have a conversation around trust. What I find is that I end up coming in and working with a team or encouraging a team to think about, you have to start to just get to know the people that are sitting around the table.
Absolutely.
Because the reality is that really the foundation of trust is really belonging. And when we think about belonging and having people understand who else is sitting in the room, how they think about things, you can then dig into more work, right? We're talking about the human experience. So I am very much focused on kind of thinking about, like, what's the neutral space that can be created where people can be honest without creating blame. So we're talking about how people are communicating with one another, how they show up, how decisions are made, how expectations are set and either clear or not clear. And for me, that's really thinking about sort of what are those things that teams need: shared agreements, clear roles, explicit commitments. And the reality that I always tell folks and I reinforce over and over is that this is not a, like, I checked this off the list
Right.
and trust is done.
And we've got it. Yay, trust.
We've got it, right? Like, congratulations. We're done with this trust thing that Suzanne's making us do. It's really a practice, right? You have to commit to doing that with your team, because the thing about trust is that it takes a really long time to build and it takes a moment to destroy.
Yes. And that's a great segue into my next question in terms of what are the most common trust killers that you see on a leadership team?
It's such a, I mean, there's so many. I could probably do like a list. I'll think about like just a couple. I think one of them is that there's a lack of clarity. A lack of clarity might look like that the expectations of the work might be unclear. People don't necessarily know kind of where they're going, or the roles might be unclear. I might be doing this work, but you also might be doing some of this work, but I'm not
Right.
really sure like which of us is actually
Who
doing
owns
this work.
it? Yeah.
Who owns it? And then we get a lovely power dynamic or feeling like we're stepping on toes, or worse. And sometimes I see this in schools because we're all so community focused, where no one wants to step on toes, so no one does the work instead.
Yes.
And so everyone sort of takes a step back. But lack of clarity might be like, we don't actually know what the priorities are here. So we've got too many things going on. There's just a lot happening here.
Yeah.
Another one is avoidance. I think that when we don't address issues early and often, that's where things can get really dicey. I think about kindness not being nice.
Yes. Can we just pause there for a second? Because I think
let's
that is
talk about
so important. People love to be nice. It's sometimes hard to be kind, to say the thing that you know needs to be said, that might be a little bit uncomfortable, but it is the right thing to do versus just being nice and saying, oh no, everything's fine. We're okay. You're okay. While everything's burning down around you. Like I
Yes.
use that phrase so much. It is important to be kind. It is not as important to be nice. I mean, like we want to be nice and everyone wants to be seen as someone who's nice, but kind is important.
I love that. And I say this all the time. And I feel like for those that I work with in coaching engagements, like we're constantly talking about kind versus nice. Nice feels good for us, right?
Yes.
We think we're not creating waves. We're not actually going to dig into that difficult conversation. We're not going to say the thing that actually needs to be said because it's just sometimes easier, and sometimes it's more that we just don't want to make other people upset. But it always comes back and bites you later on.
Every time.
Every time. Every time. So avoidance is a thing that really kills trust. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's true in both one-on-one relationships, and it's true on teams. When we avoid those difficult conversations, other people know you're avoiding them.
Absolutely.
And they don't like it.
Yes. Yes, you are absolutely correct. One other thing that erodes trust and sorry, I just as a trust killer. I like that.
Yeah.
That's why I'm like, let me go back to the phrase that I started out with it because I like that trust killer kind of thing. So
Yeah,
one
it's
other thing that kills trust.
I think inconsistency is another thing that is a
yes.
trust killer, right? You say one thing, but you do something else. It also just drives people
Nuts.
completely. You're right, nuts. Like I watch it. I've lived it, right? And I think we reserve the right as leaders to change our mind.
Sure.
And I think that is something that you should always think about, right? You can change your mind. I hope that we are challenging ourselves to push our thinking, to get more information, to learn, to maybe change our minds. But you got to tell people that you changed your mind
Right.
and why, right? So, or sometimes the inconsistency of saying one thing and then doing something else is like, I'm going to tell you in the moment because I'm going to go back to the nice thing for a second. That'll make you feel good that I'm going to do this. But then when I actually am going to do it, I'm actually going to do the thing that I think is the right thing to do that I did not tell you I was going to do. So those are things that really, in my opinion, kind of pop up time and time again as trust killers.
Yeah.
It is not often a team loses trust because there's been a big, massive failure.
Right.
It's one small thing after another.
Slow drip.
It's a slow drip. And that's where I oftentimes will talk about the difference between disagreeing and misalignment. So teams that have disagreement are actually really healthy teams.
Yeah.
You actually want a whole variety of voices at your table who push back, who bring things up, who are willing to actually maybe not see the steps the same way, but understand where the team is going and what the ultimate goal is.
Right.
But a misaligned team is a problem. And that means not only do they not agree on the way things are going, but they don't actually agree on where they're going. And so I oftentimes will work with teams and say, with a team that has this high disagreement, It's like putting your destination into your Google Maps before you get in the car. You and I both might think that we're going to Chicago, and I might want to take the highway, and you've decided, Bridget, that you want to meander through back roads and avoid all highways. But we know we're both going to Chicago.
Right.
But one of us is making the decision on which way we're going.
Uh-huh.
When we're misaligned, I might be going to Chicago and you might say, oh, actually, I'm so sorry, we're going to Miami.
That's
And
a little bit of a problem.
right, slightly different cities.
Slightly.
And that's where I see, so now not only do we not have agreement on how we're getting there, but we also aren't going in the same direction at all.
Right.
And that's really hard for teams to come back from. And that's where the conversations around getting back to basics, building trust, understanding kind of the norms, the conversations, and the patterns of behavior that we want to address become really important.
It does. And so, we made the statement that, or we agree on the statement that trust takes time to build, but is destroyed quickly. And it's not necessarily this kind of one explosive event that happens. It's kind of a slow drip. But when this trust has been killed, when it's been destroyed, where do you even start to repair the process? How do you begin? You mentioned you started getting back to basics, but what does that look like?
It's a great question. And so, I do this as a team coach, but I also think teams can do this themselves if you have a leader who's willing to kind of spend the time to build the trust and figure out what's happening. It's the time. You got to make it. It doesn't just appear for you. The work, when I do the work, I am actually having a conversation with every member of a team to figure out from their perspective what's working on the team, where there's room for improvement, kind of what's happening from the individual perspective, because the way I see it may actually be different than the way you see it or how someone else on the team sees it. And that's not a bad thing. It's just each of us comes with our own truth to those moments.
Right.
And then I actually have the team review that information without assigning blame, right? I don't think that teams are coming in and being like, we've intentionally tried to make this trust thing an issue. What I actually find is that when teams are willing to have the conversation, when either they're trying to get better because things are already going really well, or they recognize there's some challenges, or even just because they've had turnover on the team. And every time we have a new person join the team itself is actually brand new.
Right.
So there's those moments where we have to really think about, who are we? How do we want to show up? What's actually happening? So if we're an existing team, kind of having those conversations like I just said, and then just saying like, this is what we've learned about what is happening for us. How is it costing us as a team in getting our work done? And then it's starting to kind of create some safety in the framework of the team. What are those structured protocols? How do you create frameworks for the team? Do you give people a shared or common language? And then when you create a container that invites people in to be honest, they're much more willing to talk about what's happening in the group dynamic.
Absolutely. I think all those things are so important. And, that is the foundation. If you don't have that, it is really hard to operate as a team. It's really hard to get things done and move things forward. And so I know the other thing that you do a lot with teams and in schools is strategic thinking and strategic planning. And so let's shift to that a little bit. And so let's talk about that. So you mentioned that organizations today must be agile and not tied to goals that no longer serve them. And in this day and age, I mean, I think it's first started with COVID. People had to realize that they had to be nimble and shift, and no one was ready to shift at that point. But now that you can do it, right? They had to do it. They did it. But now, thinking about this ever-changing landscape in education in general, like right now, you still have to think about being nimble and shifting. And so what does that mean now to think strategically in that way, especially when, we're so often reactive instead of proactive?
Oh, I mean, I don't know about you, but I was ready for the word pivot to be eliminated from the English language in COVID.
Right.
Because how many times did we
Oh,
pivot?
we had to pivot. We were like spinning in circles, I feel like.
Right. So we were in like this world of pivot. And being agile is something lots of organizations that are not schools have talked about for years, right? Sort
Right.
of kind of what does it mean to kind of be able to move quickly and to shift dynamically. Schools didn't really need to do that, right? And as
Right. Yeah.
leaders, we didn't have to do that in schools. We knew, and I think for some of us, as someone who really loves, a bit of a cycle, I like to know that school started in the fall and then in the spring. Yes, May was crazy, but it came to an end, and everyone went off for the summer, and I had time to plan. And COVID really had schools and school leaders thinking differently about what it means to be agile and needing to be agile. And I don't know, I think there was not a lot of time for strategic thinking during COVID. We were
Absolutely
in
not.
such reaction mode,
Yes.
right? I mean, I feel like every day I was like, we made a decision yesterday that the information we got today
It's
showed
totally
us it was
different.
totally different. Try again, which is exhausting, right? And I think that today now we talk about strategic thinking, and I think that leaders in education oftentimes connect strategic thinking with strategic planning, and they're really different things, right? So when I think about strategic thinking, this is really a discipline of stepping out of your urgency long enough to see the big picture.
Nice.
And that's where you start to ask what matters most, what's possible, and what do we need to stop doing in order to move forward? A question I don't think we ask enough.
I love that question. I think that's a great one.
And I also think we have leaders who think that they need to be going and producing 24/7. And
Right.
I know the to-do list in schools in education is incredibly long.
Mm-hmm.
We are looking at another thing to do or another initiative to come up, or you have parents coming at you. You have a board that has ideas that's happening. Depending on where you sit in the organization, it might be your head of school who has these ideas that they want you to execute on.
Right.
But to me, strategic thinking is the antidote to reactivity. And so rather than just constantly reacting, thinking strategically allows individuals, leaders, teams to actually start to respond with intention rather than just like this instinct to do.
Yes. But there's often that tension between strategic thinking and day-to-day operations. And leaders say, I don't have time to think strategically. I'm too busy putting out fires. How do you help teams kind of work through that and break that cycle?
It's such a good question, because everyone feels like they don't have enough time,
Exactly.
right? I don't think it takes a lot of time to think strategically.
Okay.
I do think people think that I'm wrong. And I oftentimes I work really hard to prove them wrong. I think we can find opportunities to think strategically in small chunks.
Okay.
Now, in the work I do as a leadership coach, as a leadership consultant, I will work with teams in their team retreat in the summer, and they want big chunks of time to think strategically. That's great. And I love that when teams have that, right? They're usually doing some sort of planning, right?
Right.
Not the big 5-year strategic plan that your school's doing, but you might be thinking about sort of how are we planning the year for our team and what we want to accomplish, right? But teams don't actually need even a 3-hour chunk in order to do strategic thinking. You can actually do it in, 15, 20-minute chunks.
Oh, tell us more.
Yeah, I think it's frameworks, right? How do you have a framework to create a structure in order to get people's insights that come naturally when they pause? And so often what strategic thinking is asking you to do is to pause. And that's getting out of this reactivity mode, right? Sort of getting
Right.
out of the day to day and saying, I want us to think about this one question and come up with ideas for the next few minutes. And then let's talk about what those ideas are.
Yeah.
And if there was one we could move on, what would that one be?
I
That's
like
strategic thinking. You have a newsletter that I send out once a month, and I do these kind of one-off exercises. And sometimes I'll do things like take your team's temperature or do this strategic thinking exercise with your team, because I want leaders to understand that we think we need a lot more time than we do in order to think strategically, either as a team around the work and the priorities that we do, or as leaders about how we show up as leaders. And it doesn't require that much time. It just requires that you make some time for it to happen.
Yeah, just making a little bit of a shift, right? Just thinking
Right.
about things a little bit differently can really help you kind of reframe and think strategically in a way that kind of feels natural, right? You don't have to take this, half a day to answer a question.
Absolutely. And it just means that you have to add it into the agenda, right?
Right.
What are those? I'll also pull back for a moment and say I think a lot of team agendas have topics that don't necessarily need to be happening within the team meeting. And so if you're willing to really look at your team meeting time to see what should be on the agenda versus what should not be on the agenda, or as I oftentimes will say, might actually just be an email.
An email, yes.
Right? I mean, you and I've never worked together, but I'm sure we've both been in meetings where you're like, oh, wow, we
Seriously
all
right
came
now?
together and have this conversation right now. Okay.
Okay.
So glad this is what we're talking about.
Such
Or
a
you
great
hear
use
people,
of my time. Yes, this is awesome.
right. You get people who are like, oh my gosh, that was 15 minutes of my life I'm never
I
getting
get
back.
back.
And yet I sort of think, like, what if we shifted the time when we're together as teams to actually think about the importance of moving work forward,
Right.
as opposed to talking about the stuff that feels easy to check off the box, but isn't necessarily moving the work of the team or the organization forward. And so, taking that 15 minutes of the stuff that could have just been an email and transferring it to things around, like, what's the work that we're needing to accomplish, or taking 10 minutes and having people generate ideas around, we've got all these things going on. What do we need to stop doing going into next year? Sometimes those are the really eye-opening conversations that teams need to be having, that they aren't often having enough. And then we end up in these cycles. And this is not just a school thing, but in education, we see it a lot of, we're all doing so many things. And there are definitely initiatives that probably need to be paused or eliminated.
Absolutely. So team effectiveness, I think that's a great segue into our kind of our next topic, which is, you know, trying to make sure that your team is effective and thinking about how you do that. But you're a Gallup Strength certified strength coach, and your work is built around the Clifton Strength framework. And so, for listeners who aren't familiar, why is a strength-based approach so powerful for team effectiveness?
I love this topic. I could talk about it all day, Bridget. So yes, I became a certified strengths coach when I was still doing the work at Walnut Hill and I was still in-house. And I am really passionate about the work of Clifton Strengths that Gallup uses. So I find that when we use strengths, and I use the Clifton Strengths assessment with teams very often, it gives leaders a common language for understanding what they do well and how others on their team do things well. And so when people understand what strengths are in the room, they actually start to kind of show up as their very authentic selves, right? And we know that research shows us that diverse teams outperform teams that are kind of all the same. And that looks and feels in lots of different ways. And strengths plays into that. So just because my strengths may look and feel very different than your strengths doesn't mean that we can't be on the same team. Actually, it usually means we work incredibly well together,
Right.
because I might need someone with a certain strength in order to uncover a blind spot for me, or help me think differently, or move things forward. So when we think about strengths on a team, one, I think first about the individual. Who am I and how do I show up in the work that I do every day? I know what my strengths are. I now can share them with others. I can start to define how those show up for me. Clifton strengths, also, those strengths all come with what they refer to as a blind spot. So how does that strength look like when it's in overdrive? And using myself as an example, my number 2 strength is achiever. At its best, I am very goal oriented and I get a lot done. But when it's functioning in its blind spot, I oftentimes won't delegate, or I think I can do something way better than everyone else. And it's not because you can't do it. It's more that I just get on overdrive there. Sometimes having someone else call that out for you is really important. And sometimes having someone else say, I can take this from you, is really important.
Absolutely.
Or let's pair together on this. And so when I'm working with teams around strengths, it's a basis for understanding who's in the room that creates moments of vulnerability and conversation that aren't necessarily around kind of revealing your deepest, darkest secrets from when you were a child. But
Right.
to talk about actually how you show up at work and how those strengths you have might impact other people. And I work with teams and think about that work so often because we're really thinking about helping people function at their best.
Right. And so I love, some of the Gallup research you cite is really compelling. People who focus on strengths are 3 times as likely to have an excellent quality of life and 6 times as likely to be engaged at work. But, we often think about, and there's often pressure to kind of focus on fixing weaknesses instead. And so how do you get people to shift that mindset?
It's so hard.
Thank you for your honesty.
It is. We live in this. I think that some of it is, recognizing we're here in the United States, and I think there's this concept for us of like, if you work hard enough, you can achieve anything that you set your mind to, and you can overcome things. And it's not to say that you can't tap into your weaknesses and actually make some movements on them. But the
Right.
research that Gallup does around Clifton Strengths shows that you actually go further faster when you put time, energy, and effort into your strengths versus your weaknesses. And so I will say, when I've done my full 34, at the very bottom of my list is a strength called harmony, which folks high in harmony, they really thrive in the world of consensus. They're looking to bring people together around consensus. I don't care about consensus at all. I don't live in that world. I'm really comfortable with disagreement. I think to kind of flip back to the beginning, right? I think disagreement's actually really healthy. I recognize that in myself. And what's been really powerful for me and it's where kind of knowing what's you're not as strong at and having other people on the team. I've had a team member say to me who's been high harmony, pull back and say, you might want to circle back with these people one more time before we do this, right? Like that was me being like, we've made the decision, we've moved on,
Moving
let's
on.
keep going. And having a team member say,
maybe not.
you might want to take a beat, Suzanne. Really healthy, right? Really
Yes.
healthy. My brain doesn't work in a consensus framework. I can do it. It takes time. It takes energy. It's really uncomfortable. I often say that when we're, and I say this when I do workshops all the time, right? When we are functioning in what what they refer to as lesser strengths, but you might define as weaknesses. It's like wearing a pair of shoes that's a little bit too small. You can do it, right?
But
you
it doesn't feel good.
right, like you does not feel good, and you are like, get me home and put me in a pair of slippers and put me back in my strengths.
Yeah.
That's what functioning in our weaknesses looks like. And so it's rare. I think it's twice in all the time I've been doing these Clifton Strengths workshops, and I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people doing this work, and I've only had 2 over the time who've come in afterwards. Neither were in schools, interestingly enough, that have said, I actually now understand why this job hasn't felt right.
Oh, interesting.
And it's because I am sitting in the bottom of my strengths list. And so every day feels really hard. And that's where I start to say, then I'm like, oh, okay, you should probably have a conversation with your manager around what would make this job more sitting in your strength zone as opposed to sitting at the bottom of your list. I mean, the reality is like weaknesses are real, right? We're never all going to be good at everything, and we shouldn't expect to be.
Exactly. Yeah.
But the work of the research through Gallup is that you sort of manage your weaknesses, right? You manage that, you partner with other people, but you invest in your strengths. And when you actually invest in your strengths, you actually get stronger engagement, better performance, higher well-being, and people feel the immediate impact. It's like, I always say, like, we know when we're in that flow zone at work. You feel it. It feels good. You've come out, like, you can do the things even when they're really hard. That's when you're really working within your strengths and feeling really good about it.
I love that. And that's so great. So I think it's time for us to get practical, because I know people are like,
Okay.
all right, tell me
Let's
what to
get
do.
practical.
I need some tools.
I love practical.
For the student life professional or the academic leader who's listening, who knows their team needs help but doesn't know where to start, how do they figure out what their team actually needs? Is it trust building, strategic thinking, process improvement? Like, what do they do first?
Yeah, I mean, because it's overwhelming, right? If
Yes,
you're trying to figure out what's
absolutely.
wrong. And it's hard too, because I'll pause for a second before I get into this and just say, we aren't often taught how to be leaders of teams.
Nope.
And some of it we feel like is through osmosis. You learn it through the people who led you before. And I don't know about you, but I've worked for some leaders that have not been the best models of
Not so awesome.
leadership.
Not so awesome.
Not so awesome. And that's not to say that they were not good human beings and decent people. It's more that they didn't understand what they needed to do in order to bring people along either. And so much of the work I'm doing and what I want organizations to understand is, like, you have to teach people leadership skills before they have a title. And that also means that you're modeling it and that you have people understand that they're also leading without titles, right? So kind of all of those pieces come together. And so if you're a leader who is struggling with your team and you're not even sure where to start, so often what I say is, what are the symptoms that you're seeing? And so if it's that you have a team that's avoiding hard conversations and they won't dig in, sometimes that's trust, right? You're kind of like, if we're not willing to say the things in the room, there's another underlying issue there. Teams that sound or seem overwhelmed all the time, you can feel it. They talk about the overwhelm or the busy. That's usually strategic thinking.
Yes.
They haven't paused enough to figure out what the priorities are to move things forward efficiently and effectively. If a team is frustrated, if a team is not really efficient, if they look like they're spinning their wheels, that feels and looks different than a team overwhelmed. To me, that's process, right? Like, they don't understand the steps in order to get things done. So that's what I oftentimes will say, like, what's what if there's like one thing you can do to move it forward, that's where you start. Sometimes a leader's not sure. And in that case, Your team knows what the problem is. You can ask them. They want to be involved, right? People don't want to be on a team that's not a winning team.
Right. Absolutely.
They like to win. I think it's also the reason why people like to watch sports, right? They want their team to win. They want to be invested in it. So if you're not really sure, you can ask. And if you don't want to do it with the full team, you can ask in a one-on-one, right? So tell me, if there was one thing that you think this team could do better, what would that be from your perspective? And I always say, start with the thing that's costing the team the most energy. So if you're finding that you have some process issues and you have some trust issues, which one is costing more energy? My guess in that instance is it's probably trust, but you know your team best.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that you just mentioned, and I think it's so important to touch on, and really a good chunk of my audience is in the middle, leading from the middle or leading without the title. And so important to talk about, or leading or being thrust in the leadership and not having in the leadership training. What do newer mid-level leaders most need to understand about effective leadership?
Sure. I love this question. And there's so many things. There's so many things you need to know. And yet I also think there are 4 ways that I think we all lead. We lead up. So how do you lead up to the person that you report into? And everyone in our schools reports up into someone, including your head of school, who's reporting up into your board. Right. So do you report to a division head or an assistant head or to your head of school? So that leading up piece. Not everyone leads down, right? You have a team of direct reports that report up into you. That for many people feels like more, I would say, traditional leadership,
right?
But you don't need to have a team in order to be a leader. Leading across, collaborative leadership, what does it mean to work with people with whom you do not have any direct reporting line, not even a dotted line, that you're trying to get things done? So how do we work together in order to move things forward? I think of this as like the hidden leadership skill we don't talk enough about in schools, especially. How are we moving things together forward? And then the last one is self-leadership. How do we think about improving ourselves? Because we know that when we focus on self-reflection and improvement, it makes us better leaders, but we also become better leaders for the organization and for our teams, and it's a trickle-down effect. And so those are things I think about. And so when I think about working with either mid-level leaders, new leaders, having those folks understand what their strengths are, understanding their role, what the impact is of their influence, right? So how do you think about in all those different ways? You begin to lead with confidence. And I always remind leaders when I'm working with them, leadership is not about doing more.
Yes. Say that for the people in the back. Absolutely.
Leadership is not about doing more. The goal as a leader is that you are trying to create clarity, you are trying to communicate, and you are trying to create alignment. And those are the things that you're trying to do. You're not trying to do more. You're not just becoming a leader to add more to your plate.
Right.
So I think that those are the things that I really want kind of those mid-level or new leaders or emerging leaders to think about, that you really need to take time. Right? It kind of goes back to that strategic thinking thing in the same way, right? How do you pause? How do you assess? And how do you move forward?
Yes. And so if you could get every leadership team to do one thing differently tomorrow, what would it be?
I want them to slow down.
Oh, yes. That's great. Tell me more.
Tell you more. Yes. I want them to slow down. We don't see this full picture until we slow down.
Yes.
Until we ask more questions, until we dig into things more, until we make sure that the voices have been heard. I see it time and time again with leadership teams where you have a leader who is pushing the team so hard, so fast, it creates clarity issues, it creates trust issues, it creates all of these things that pop up. And if you slow down and ask a couple of more questions, you actually gain a lot more insight. And so slowing down creates space to think, and it doesn't hold you back. A dear friend from my time at Walnut Hill, Linda Hughes, who passed away about a year ago, used to have this wonderful phrase that said, "Go slow to go fast." And I say it all the time, right? Go slow to go fast. And when you do that, you actually create more alignment. You create a team that's really cohesive and moving in the same direction. So I want your teams to slow down.
Slow down, go slow to go fast. I think that is awesome. And so, Suzanne, for listeners who want to learn more about your work or explore working with Carpenter Leadership Consulting, where should they start? What's available on your website, and how can they connect with you?
Yeah, great. So my website is carpenterleadership.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. So I'm Suzanne, Susanne Carpenter on LinkedIn. And you can learn about what I offer through my website. You can sign up for my newsletter. I have a blog. I have a new course that has popped up for January. So there's a bunch of different things that you can do that way. But if folks want to work with me or think more, they are always welcome to reach out. I am working with folks in a variety of ways, right? So I do one-on-one coaching. I work with teams. I run leadership retreats. I end up speaking. I do Clifton Strengths workshops. So there's a variety of ways that I end up working with leaders and teams. And I'm always excited to kind of even just talk about kind of the possibility of what your team or you may need.
Awesome. And so, last question. You draw on your own journey as a leader in your coaching work. What's one lesson from your leadership experience that fundamentally changed how you approach developing other leaders?
Oh, yes. I think it's the thing that it took me a long time to learn, which is I didn't have to have all the answers.
Ah, yes. We all, as leaders, think we need that. It's kind of our security blanket. We have to know everything.
Well, right. It's also a moment of complete overwhelm, though, as a new leader. I don't know about you, but I certainly felt as though I was being judged, and I'm sure I wasn't, right? It was just this feeling of, you now have this title that has the word director in it at the start, and you must be kind of the all-knowing Oz.
Yeah.
I don't know, right? So I feel like we think we need to have all the answers, and yet I actually, what really I find so powerful is that we don't need to have all the answers. You actually just need to ask really good questions.
Yes. That is great. And be curious. We haven't talked about that very much today, but curiosity is so important. And so that means you have to come back, Suzanne, because I think talking a little bit more about new leaders and leading from the middle is something that people would certainly benefit from. So I hope you will join us again sometime, maybe later this spring, perhaps. I love that. And so one other thing that you want people to take away from our conversation today.
Well, as you probably gathered, I really love talking about leaders and teams and how we make these better for all of us. We spend so much of our time at work, and I want our schools to feel like these wonderful places where people are growing and learning and moving forward. So I just want to say thank you to you for continuing to have these conversations on your podcast and moving things forward. And I appreciate you having me on. I'm excited to continue the conversation, and hopefully we get to the chance to do this again soon.
Yeah, I hope so too. And so, folks, you new leaders out there, or even veteran leaders, taking a pause, slowing down a little bit can really help. And so I hope that's something that you can think about incorporating today in the new year. And so with that said, thank you so much, Suzanne. It was awesome having you on. And I definitely would love to have you back sometime in the near future. So with that said, thanks for pulling up a chair at the table today. I hope this conversation gave you something to think about. or maybe even something to try out in your own community. If you're enjoying the table, don't forget to subscribe, share it with a friend, or leave us a comment. It really helps more people find us. And as always, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time at the table. Have a good one.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Table Podcast Series. Is your student life program delivering on your mission? Our K-12 student life assessment moves you beyond anecdotes to evidence-based decisions. Through comprehensive stakeholder surveys and expert analysis, you'll get concrete insights across 8 essential dimensions of student life, from culture and wellness to staff effectiveness and resource allocation. We're seeking founding partner schools to be the first to experience this transformative assessment process and help shape the future of student life evaluation. Today's episode was hosted by Bridget Johnson in conversation with Suzanne Carpenter, produced and edited by Andrew Sigmund and music by PremiumBeat.com. For any questions, contact information can be found in the episode description. And, as always, thanks again for listening.